Hello, I'm Graeme Park, and in this session, which takes place in front of an online audience of students from Glyndwr University, I'll be talking to someone who's worked at the Sheffield Crucible, the Royal Court Theatre, the National Theatre Studio, the West Yorkshire Playhouse, and he's currently the Artistic Director of the Curve Theatre in Leicester. Please welcome Nikolai Foster. Hello, Nikolai.
Hi, Graeme. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me and my students. Now, you've been the Artistic Director of the Curve Theatre in Leicester since 2015. I've mentioned some of the other places you've worked in, but before we come to the Curve, can you tell us about yourself, your background, your journey to the Curve? For example, did the young Nikolai growing up in Yorkshire think, I really want to be an artistic director? Tell us how you got to where you are.
Blimey, that's a brilliant question. It's quite a long story. We moved to the UK when I was 3, so we arrived from Denmark, as I say, when I was 3 years old, and ended up in West Yorkshire, a little town called Hebden Bridge. And that
I know
was
Hebden Bridge.
Do you?
Lovely place to grow up.
Yeah, really, really wonderful place. We haven't been back for years, but we sort of that was the first place we sort of landed, and then sort of lived various points around sort of West Yorkshire, very sort of rural sort of upbringing, very sort of normal comprehensive school, all of that sort of thing. And I guess it was sort of during those sort of high school years, I sort of started to develop this interest in the theatre. It was back in the day when, you know, teachers weren't sort of compelled by the curriculum and, you know, in some way shackled in terms of sort of gearing students just towards, you know, these endless exams, and creativity and arts and culture were very much celebrated at our comprehensive, certainly, and had a great English teacher and a great drama teacher. And as the sort of interest in those sort of subjects started to grow, they really were wonderful and supported it. I never really thought, you know, you could do anything more with acting or theatre. It was just a sort of wonderful hobby. It sort of kept the bullies at bay. It sort of gave me a real sort of focus in my sort of those formative years, and I loved it. And then as things sort of started to get a bit more serious, I guess when you start thinking about A-levels and the future, then I thought, well, actually, I'd love to go to drama school and be an actor. And, you know, acting was what you saw at youth theatre. When you went to the theatre on TV and film, actors were the sort of people that you sort of aspired to be like. And so auditioned for the drama schools and went off to a place called Drama Centre London, which was a very small sort of what you'd call a conservatoire, 3 years, 30 kids in each year, very sort of intense sort of method-based training. And it was there that the sort of interest and appreciation of what a director does really started to grow. And
I read, sorry to interrupt, I read that you went to Drama Centre with Tom Hardy and Stephen Wright.
Yeah, so Tom and Stephen were in my year. In our 3rd year was an actor called Michael Fassbender, who yes. I remember, because as first years, the great thing about Drama Centre was, you know, you'd start work at 9 and start college at 9 in the morning, finish, you know, 9, 10 o'clock at night. It was intense, rigorous. You know, the focus was absolutely on the art and making theatre. And as first years, we had to do the box office, the lighting, build the sets, stage crew for our 3rd years. And I remember they were doing a play, The Silver Tassie, and there was this actor, Michael Fassbender, playing, you know, the central role. And just sort of, I think I was on stage crew and just sort of sitting, you know, off stage, watching him, being absolutely blown away. And again, sort of then, I guess in hindsight, realizing that my interest in what he was doing was not really from an actor's point of view. I wasn't interested in doing what he was doing. I couldn't do what he was doing. It was magical. It was great acting. And I realized in hindsight that that was probably part of that sort of thing of putting together that interest and idea of what a director does. And as I say, Drama Centre was a tough place. At the end of the second year, there'd be a cull of students. And if they didn't feel you were going to be successful in a career as an actor, you would be thrown out. And they would literally get rid of, half the year if they thought that was appropriate. And I was on that list. They were like, you are going home. You are not good enough. We don't want you in the third year. And that was terrifying. My mum had basically maxed out every credit card. We'd taken every local authority grant going, come from a working class background with literally nothing. And, getting to drama school was a huge, huge thing.
Yeah.
And the thought of sort of going back to Yorkshire, having failed with my tail between my legs, was just, I just remember the sort of image of my mum and just feeling, my goodness, I can't fail. I've got to find a way to carry on. And I honestly don't know where it came from, but I said to Christopher Fettis, who was the principal, who had trained Anthony Hopkins and whom Anthony Hopkins had based Hannibal Lecter in The Silence on the Lambs on this man. So you can imagine how terrifying he was. I said to him, I'll come back in my third year and I'll work as a director. I will assist you. I'll learn about directing. And, he sort of stared at me and I thought, blimey, the ground's going to open up, and that's sort of the end of it, really. I'm not only going to be chucked out of Drama Centre, but I'm now going to die as the ground sort of swallows me up. And no, they said, yeah, come back and, learn about directing.
So you basically, watching Michael Fassbender influenced your kind of thought process, and you wanted this so badly that you came up with the idea of coming back as a director.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, it was in hindsight, I realised that in that second year, especially at drama school, when we were working on projects, I was sort of scripting them. I was sort of rallying the group together. I was trying to, get Tom Hardy on a leash and get him into rehearsals while he was, off being brilliant and sort of maverick Tom Hardy. And so there was that element of sort of, in hindsight, I realised I was thinking like a director. I was using some of the tools, whether it's thinking about the lighting or bringing in all of the props or helping on the script. I was sort of putting it all together. And my interest in acting was sort of taking a backseat, if you like, as that sort of other aspect started to come to the fore. And so really, I mean, genuinely, it was a get out of jail card. I just thought, how on earth can I save myself? How can I stay here? Because I can't be kicked out. It's it's a disaster, basically. So it was genuinely a sort of attempt to save my skin and carry on with my training and get through to the end of the 3 years. And I knew vaguely in the back of my mind that 10 years ago at that point, Drama Centre did do a director's course. It had been wound down, but it was something that existed. And so it was a desperate plea, but it worked.
Yeah. So obviously, if you're aware of the Drama Centre having done director's course before, you must have done your research on the Drama Centre in advance, and you're in your early 20s, but already you're, like you say, you're starting to think like a director, because presumably as a director you have to deal with all kinds of unforeseen issues, and here you are doing it at a very early part of your career.
Yeah, totally. And it was incredible that third year, because I was sort of set free. I didn't have to worry about acting, and I could sort of concentrate on this new sort of thing, which was very unique and suddenly opened up my mind and really blew my mind. And it was it was a really good example of sort of taking the opportunities that you are given and really running with them. So during that third year, back in the day, we used to have this thing called a fax machine, and in the office at the drama school, a fax came through, and it was asking for a rehearsal assistant up at the Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch in Essex. And they basically wanted somebody to go along and basically make the tea and, do any odd jobs that needed doing in the rehearsal room, because they had a sort of rep company up there. And so I used to toddle off every afternoon from Drama Centre. They were very kind and generous, as, obviously letting me come back and sort of do this, director's course. It was rather brilliant. So I'd go off to Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch and be in a rehearsal room and just marvel and watch. And obviously at drama school, it was incredible. We had great actors, great students, but here was a professional rehearsal room, and really enjoyed that experience. There was a wonderful Lady Maria Charles, who was playing Lady Bracknell, and she was proper sort of old school, bit of a legend in her day. And, you know, she used to give me a lift back in the evening, and I'd sort of, you know, drain her of all her great sort of theatrical anecdotes and stories. And it was at the Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch again, the old fax machine. There was an advert in the green room for what was the Channel 4 Regional Theatre Young Directors Scheme. And, you know, I'd never heard of it, but, you know, it said you can apply and you can go and work in the regional theatre for 18 months and, you know, be an assistant and learn how it all works. And again, it was chance, it was luck. The advert was there. I applied for it. I spent months slaving over that application form, and then lo and behold, got through and spent nearly, I think, 2.5, 3 years at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield, training as a director, learning from great directors like Michael Grandage, incredible actors who came to play there. And from there, then went off to be a freelance theatre director and did that for about 15 years before applying for the role at Curve. And then that's a very long-winded way, Graeme, of answering your brilliant sort of kick-off question.
No, but it's great because there's a common theme with a lot of the guests we've had, not just people who work in theatre, but people who work across a lot of the creative sector. And you said the chance of seeing just by chance seeing the faxes, but then acting on it. I think that's a really important lesson to get across. Of course, the difference today is now we've got social media, haven't we? People can constantly be looking for things, but you just found these by chance and grasped it with both hands.
Yeah, and I think what is, you know, there are the theatre and arts and culture and many industries have a lot to do in terms of breaking down invisible barriers and making jobs and career pathways and routes into the theatre much more accessible, transparent, and, you know, ensuring it's a level playing field. And I think social media and our availability as artistic directors, theatre makers, whatever you want to sort of call it today, is much better. I mean, certainly when I was starting out, it really was a closed shop. There was no easy or visible way into the theatre, and it really was, you know, as somebody who was hungry and alert and always, you know, would walk past the stage door and, you know, see if you could see anything, you know, what was going on in there, because you were so curious and so keen to sort of drink it all in and soak it all up. So any of those little sort of tips or hooks that I could find, I absolutely grasped. And of course, today, I think, weirdly, we've sort of gone so far now that, you know, if you want to find out about RTYDS, which we run at Curve, or you want to find out about the Birkbeck Directors Course, or you want to find out about drama schools, you can go on their websites, you can go on Instagram, you can go on Twitter, you can join events like this. I was doing a directors event for people who want to be artistic directors last night. So there are so many sort of ways to learn about it that, weirdly, I think if you're a young person or a person of any age, quite frankly, thinking about getting into theatre, whether it's as an actor, a director, a designer, whoever, weirdly, the saturation of information, I feel, could be quite overwhelming these days, because there are so many courses and so many possible avenues you can go down. And of course, they're time consuming. It takes a long time to fill out an application form, to give it thought, to give it space to sort of, you know, ruminate and develop. So I was really grateful that, as I sort of touched on earlier, that I was around at a time when the national curriculum was there, but teachers had a lot more flexibility to teach and sort of go with the direction that they felt was helpful, you know, to a group of young people, rather than being sort of held in sort of chains, which I think a lot of teachers are today. And it was an easier, clearer, simpler time.
I totally get that, because I mean, I'm older than you, but same, my school, my comprehensive in Scotland, I had great teachers, music teachers and drama teachers, and sadly that has changed now, hasn't it? Why do you think it's changed, and what are the effects trickling down to what you do?
I think it has to do with the curriculum and how things of, I mean, I remember when I went to do my A levels at my comprehensive, where I'd had a great time. I mean, apart from the bullying, I'd loved that sort of comprehensive environment where there were subjects for days and there was freedom, and even if if it was sport or design technology, there was a creativity and people could really exercise the things they were curious about. And as I got into my A levels, I remember thinking, we just seem to be being trained to pass exams. That sort of joy of being able to sort of go off down an avenue that actually didn't have much to do with your exam or the test you were going to do, that seemed to become much more rigid, and it was all about learning what you would need to pass this exam. And I sort of rebelled then, and I actually left halfway through my levels and ended up in a college in Leeds just doing theatre studies, because I felt it was so sort of restrictive and detrimental. And I think that has carried on. The government and the education bodies have continued to place the focus on examinations, and examinations which absolutely focus, rightly in some cases, we need English, we need maths, we need the sciences, but without creativity, without freedom of expression, without sort of being able to go off down a path which may not lead anywhere. Without that freedom, we're denying generations of young people creativity, and creativity is what leads scientists, great minds like that, to grow up and become scientists who in the space of a year can deliver a vaccine for coronavirus. That is creativity. Rockets going to the moon, Apple iPads and all the rest of it. This is all coming out of creative thinking. And I think, weirdly, one of the positives coming out of this pandemic, I think, is that education bodies will start to give much more power back to local authorities and teachers, and creativity and sport and imagination will, I think, start to creep back to the fore. I mean, I hope, maybe that's naive, but that's my hope.
No, I think you're right. It would certainly be my hope as well. If you don't mind me asking, you have mentioned twice, you mentioned bullying. Was drama and theatre a way for you to deal with bullying?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it literally, I'd never really thought about theatre at all. And there was a sort of period of about 2 years where the bullying was, it was barbaric and it was extreme, and it was just something that I didn't tell anybody about and sort of lived with. And it was probably about 1.5 years into that period of sort of very dark time, obviously, in my life, where I can't sort of quite remember the sort of chronology of it, but I was sort of, I think, having my head flushed down the toilet, that sort of, regular, lovely thing. And then I sort of escaped down a corridor. It was after school, and, the place was empty. And this sort of gang of lads was chasing me. And I thought, blimey, this is it now, because the bullying up until that point had sort of been, it was psychological. It was, it was a psychological torment rather than the physical. I mean, the threat of the physical was always there, but this was actually the physical being enacted. And I remember just sort of running down this corridor and thinking, God, this is it now. I'm really gonna get sort of, beaten up. And that's, terrifying. And there was a poster on the wall for auditions for Lionel Bart's Oliver. And it was on that very day, at that very moment, they were auditioning in this deserted school. And I thought, well, if I go to the music room, I will be safe because there will be people there. So I literally ran to the music room and sort of burst in, obviously with that energy of being, chased, by the gang. Yeah, what an entrance into the world of theatre. And obviously the bullies didn't want to go in the music room with all these weirdos singing and, doing this weird thing called a musical. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was a thing called audition. So I just said, I'm here to audition for Oliver. And yeah, that was the beginning of my love affair with theatre. I was in this school play, Oliver. I played Noah Claypole. I used to stay back after rehearsals, talk to the musical director, learn about music, you know, everything ended up building the sets, lighting, you know, all of that. And just that was it. That was the beginning. So even though the bullying was obviously a nightmare, it sort of ended in something quite positive.
But there you go. There's another example of you finding yourself in a situation and grasping it with both hands and adapting it for yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Graeme. I'd never sort of connected that, but you're absolutely, spot on.
And it's so in many respects, so that story just told us the light bulb moment at the Drama Centre about being a director, but also doing the work experience as well as learning and seeing those facts is basically shaping your path and giving you experience for what you've ended up to doing. I found a lot of great quotes from you online. One of them, which I suspect, well, I'll give you the quote first. You come across as very passionate about diversifying audiences. You said, "We believe passionately we're creating great theatre in Leicester, working with the community. Theatre can change lives within a community." Has your life experience made you, want to do this diversification with the communities?
Yes, it has. And I think when I left my A levels, if you remember, and went off to Leeds to do a theatre studies A level at Park Lane College in Leeds, suddenly I was like, there's this place called West Yorkshire Playhouse where, I'd sort of gone and, seen shows. It was it was called the National Theatre of the North back in the day. And I wrote to them and, I said, can I come on, work experience? So for that year of Park Lane College, doing my final year of A level, every Monday I would go off to West Yorkshire Playhouse and do work experience. And I was basically, the photocopier boy, again, back in the day with, without all the emails and everything, I'd work for the press cuttings the press department, and all the press cuttings I'd photocopy and deliver to all the departments. And so I was like this sort of invisible person who just used to go in and, you'd see the directors, you'd see the famous actors, you'd sort of walk past the theatre and get a bit of a snapshot in, but you were never really allowed in because, it was a different time. You were just the photocopier person on work experience and you just got on with your job. But and it was never in any sense that my time there I was excluded. I was, doing what I was very grateful to do, which was my work experience. But there was always a feeling there that you were on the outside. So you were in this amazing building, but you were on the outside. And I remember as a kid, growing up in West Yorkshire, where it was all farming and rugby, and it was a very sort of, rough and ready sort of working class community, which I grew up in, industry and, men were men and all of that sort of thing. Every Saturday when I'd go off to the Bradford Lambra or, sit up in the gods and see a show, that was quite a sort of subversive thing. I always felt a bit uncomfortable walking into the theatre. I didn't feel like I belonged. There was all of this sort of weird baggage, which I realised in hindsight I felt and experienced. And, as I say, it wasn't that I wasn't welcome for my work experience. So I wasn't welcome when I went to the Bradford Lambra. There was all these weird feelings that you have going into those institutions, which are there, which are invisible. And I think, as a freelance director, you'd often go work in theatres where you didn't feel welcome. You did because you hadn't been to Oxford, you hadn't been to Cambridge, you weren't posh enough, you weren't educated enough, you weren't this, right, that, the other. So I've always, even, enjoying, hopefully quite a successful freelance career, always felt on the outside. And so I was determined with every part of my being that if I ever was lucky enough to work as an artistic director in a venue, we would do everything we can to make it as genuinely, as accessible and as open and as free to the community that theatre is built to serve as it possibly can be. And at Curve back in the day when we could actually open the doors, which we hope to do again soon, the rehearsal room is always open. You know, the doors are physically open. It's not some weird hallowed space where, you know, people are afraid to come in. Members of staff can come in, sit, watch, learn, listen to what's being created. School groups can come in, community groups can come in. And that ethos, we hope, extends to all of the theatre, so that whether you're buying a ticket, whether you're coming for a workshop, whether you're just coming for a cup of tea in the cafe and don't care about theatre and have no interest in it, you feel welcome. You feel that it is for you. You do not feel that this is some weird intellectual nebulous place where somebody is going to know more than you and you are going to be made to feel inferior or stupid or like you don't belong. And, you know, many of us in theatre come from, you know, challenging backgrounds. We didn't quite fit in. And I think the great thing about the art culture, those people who were maybe misfits in their sort of formative years, we can now come together to sort of be creative, where our voices, our ideas, our talents are recognized, celebrated, and, you know, really amplified. And that's certainly what Curve's about.
And that brings me on to another quote that you said, but you've pretty much summed up where this quote comes from. You said, "Yes, I'm a white man, but don't call me part of the establishment." And I think you really summed up that. Community, tell us about how you do work with the community, with the Curve.
In lots of different ways. So one of the sort of most visible things we used to do, and we'll do again when we get back to it, was every year we would do a community production. So we would offer members of our youth theatre, all of our, you know, community members who wanted to be part of a professionally staged, directed, executed production at Curve, there'd be traditionally a big summer musical. In recent years, we've tried to move away from the musical, and what we'd really love to do in the future is for the community to curate, write, and completely execute and create that production for themselves. Leicester's full of incredible stories. The Ugandan South Asians who came over in the 50s and 60s, Idi Amin, Joseph Merrick, Jamie Vardy, Thomas Cook. There are these incredible stories, people like Joe Orton, Sue Townsend. I think the community, rather than us saying we're doing, you know, Fiddler on the Roof or Bugsy Malone, I think the community should be empowered to tell their own stories, and stories which inspire them, and be given the resource and support to do that. So that's one way. We have a very vibrant youth and community company who meet every week, everything from like your sort of tops, you know, your 8-year-olds, right up to your sort of over 21s, and every age group in between. And they do everything from musicals to dance to acting to poetry. We have writers groups. We have our Curve resident creatives who are artists from the local region who are making work with us, who are part of the planning and the sort of direction of the venues going. We have what we call ambassadors, who are community leaders who work with their community groups to let them know what's happening at Curve, let them know about workshops. So that's sort of a sort of broad canvas of what we do. And then, you know, with each show, there would be workshops. You know, on West Side Story, we're working with the Knife crime prevention unit with the local police team to try and work with young people who were at risk of offending or were emerging from gang culture. And obviously West Side Story is a great play to sort of discuss and help them to sort of understand perhaps why being part of a gang is actually not, you know, such a great thing to do, and there are sort of other routes available. So that's sort of a sort of broad sort of you know, canvas of, you know, what we do with our community. And obviously our community are the audience, you know, they are the people who buy tickets and come and see shows. And, you know, that I think often in theatre we talk so much about the community, but we don't talk about the community as an audience. And that I think is really important. They are the people who buy tickets and support the theatre in that way. And that's really important as well.
So it sounds, you mentioned invisible barriers earlier. It sounds to me like you're doing everything in your power to break those down. But a question here from our mutual friend, Sophia, she asks, do you think those invisible barriers still exist today?
Yeah, I do think they exist. Sadly, I think they exist in many ways, shape and form. And I know, you know, as an artistic director, and it may sound odd, but, you know, there's meetings I go into or situations I find myself in within the theatre business where, gosh, you really do feel like an outsider and you feel like you don't belong, because there is a group of people who all look and sound a certain way and have sort of enjoyed a very specific sort of upbringing, which is sort of shared, and they have language and a sort of knowledge and, you know, way of doing things, which is certainly very different from my own and very different from the generation I can see coming up behind me, and is, you know, very different from many of the conversations that we're having in theatre about breaking down barriers and making sure that there's a level egalitarian playing field for everybody, regardless of cultural heritage, socioeconomic background, disability. But you can see those things still exist. And, you know, we've had the case of, you know, Broadway producers and other high profile cases within the film industry recently where you think, yeah, there's bullying. There are things going on which are retain those barriers and retain those things which frighten us and frighten me. So yeah, I think there's a long way to go, but I genuinely, like, when I talk to my colleagues in other regional theatres and you see some of the incredible work that's been done at Leeds Playhouse or in Nottingham or Chichester, you see the genuine strides that are being made and the genuine desire to learn and to accept challenge and provocations and difficult conversations. Well, I say difficult conversations, they're not difficult conversations, they're just honest conversations, which, you know, some people might perceive as being difficult, but actually having an honest conversation about cultural heritage or socioeconomic background or some of those barriers. I know at Curve we feel very enlivened and inspired, and we welcome those conversations because we genuinely don't want there to be barriers, and if there are, we want to know about them, learn about them, and just get them right, quite frankly. I mean, learn about them sounds like nebulous. Like, if we have a problem, we want to sort it out, basically.
Okay, tell us about your role at the Curve. Obviously, in normal times, we'll come to the pandemic shortly, but what is your role involved? What inspires you? How did you decide what to put on? And if someone has an idea, are you open to them coming to you, and how do they do it?
Yeah, totally. So in sort of normal times, we run a really diverse, eclectic program. So everything from sort of new work in our 90-seat studio theatre, mid-scale plays and dance work in our 350 studio, right up to the sort of mega musicals that we either produce ourselves or, you know, giving over space to producers like Cameron Mackintosh. I think the bigger musicals, they sort of take care of themselves because, you know, if a title like West Side Story or, you know, Grease is available, then we're going to want to do it and get it on our stage because, you know, 20% of our income comes from public funding. The other 80% we have to make through box office. So those big musicals, those commercial shows really, you know, help, you know, literally keep the lights on. We are committed every year to producing a play or a new musical or a new piece of work by an artist of colour. We are, rather than sort of creating more plays which sort of go into the, you know, traditionally white canon, about 7 or 8 years ago, we identified very clearly that in order to change the course of theatre and address the imbalance, then we would commit to producing a new play by an artist of colour each year. So over the years, we've done Ishidin's Wipers, Hanif Qureshi's My Beautiful Laundrette, Riaz Khan's Memoirs of an Asian Football Casual, and that tradition continues. with our Curve resident creatives. They are 16 artists, everybody from, a finger tutting artist to a poet, to contemporary dancers, South Asian dancers, playwrights. So they're always creating work, and, we're finding wonderful ways to sort of infuse it throughout the repertoire. So, and, anybody who sends us a play, we will eventually read it and come back to you, and anybody can email in with the suggestion and it will be considered and you will get a response from us. We're setting up a forum called First Fridays, first Friday of every month. An artist, a writer can meet with myself or Chris Stafford, our chief executive, or our head of creative programs, Beth Schuler, and pitch an idea or ask questions about how they develop a project. So there's lots of different pathways, but I think the important thing to say is that we will always respond. It might take a while for us to get back to you, but our aim is always to respond, and we will always consider ideas. That's what the theatre needs and what it thrives off. We've got lots of ideas, but hearing new ideas and diverse ideas and dynamic ideas from folk we've never encountered before, that is part of the excitement of it all.
It sounds like you really do put your money where your mouth is. You back up your views.
Yeah.
But how was it when you joined the Curve? Because I read that you took the role over after someone who'd been there for many years had left. What was it like coming into a new environment, working with new people, having to collaborate with new people, and trying to get your ideas across? Tell us about that.
It was really challenging. It was really lonely and quite unnerving, to be honest. I'd worked in every major theatre in this country as a freelance director, but as a freelance director, it's a very different sort of level of engagement. You're going in, you're directing your show, you have this intense period where you engage with the building in a very sort of specific way, and then you sort of chucked back out and off you go again. And as you say, Paul Kerrison, my predecessor, had not only opened and been one of the sort of motors which had got that theatre, the Curve, built, but he'd also worked at the Haymarket, another very famous theatre in Leicester, for decades before Curve. So there was a very there was a way of doing things, and a way which suited not just Paul but that entire sort of management regime and structure. And I'm obviously very different to Paul, and we're very different directors and have a sort of very different sort of view of what an artistic director is. And that's not to say that one is better or one is negative or whatever. It's just they're different. And so when I joined, I wanted to have a view of everything, from the marketing to the cafe to the way the building looked. I didn't feel that presenting the artistic vision was just done through the shows you directed. It was done through every aspect of the building. And some team members were really excited and inspired by suddenly this new person's taking an interest in the marketing or the posters or whatever it is. And obviously some people didn't like that and weren't so happy to have what they saw as interference from this sort of artist. But then it was very sort of, it was really a wonderfully sort of coincidence, and that Chris Stafford, who was the executive producer at that time, who I worked very closely with, he then became the chief executive when the brilliant Fiona Allen left Curve and went off to be the chief exec at Birmingham Hippodrome, and that forged a new partnership for the organisation with Chris and I sort of as running mates, and it meant that we were able to completely, with a clean slate, go, this is the theatre that we see, and let's all go along for the ride and build this organisation together. And it really then felt like a sort of clean slate, if you like, and really we were all empowered to really start afresh. Not that anything was wrong before, but as I say, it's just natural that different artistic leaders, different people in these roles have very clear ideas of how they would like things to be.
And can I ask you, obviously throughout your career and what you've just told us then, you've probably found yourself having to collaborate with people. Sometimes that in my experience, collaborative work can be amazing. Other times it can be difficult working with people that you might not get on with or don't know very well. What tips, what advice would you give to students about collaborative work, which I think in any of the creative sector is key to success?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I would say empathy and lack of ego, trying to sort of push your ego aside, is such an important thing, because very rarely do you work with someone who's just an idiot. Occasionally we get someone who's combative and doesn't want to be part of the team, and you just they are an idiot.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I've just thought of 3 people I've worked with over the years. No, carry.
Yeah, and it's rare, isn't it? It's rare you get that
yes,
person.
It's rare.
But most of the time people want everything to work and we're all working towards a shared goal. But sometimes people don't quite understand something, or their work ethic might be slightly different, or they might be a bit lazy, or they might be having a bad day or whatever. And I think, I've learned, because I am passionate and I'm, sort of, it's full throttle or nothing. And so sometimes, historically I've got frustrated or angry, or, you start to build in your head this idea that this person hates you, or they want to destroy the production, or whatever it is. And that's all really negative thinking, and all it does is impact on you, because it's in your head and it's draining your battery, as it were. And so I just try to listen and be empathetic and ask people questions. Why do you think we need to do it like that? Or have you thought about it this way? Or perhaps let's try this way and see how that goes before we slightly go off on this slightly random tangent that you're suggesting. So I think, yeah, it's about being open and knowing actually that if you listen to people and you're empathetic to their idea, but ultimately you might suggest we're going in a different way, that's all right. And people get it if we're working towards a common goal, a sort of shared team. But I would say listening and empathy and and you might have a very fixed idea about how you'd like a scene to be, or how as an actor you'd like to play a scene, or as a director create a production, and then suddenly somebody will come with a completely left field idea, and actually it's the best idea. So do that idea, and if you're closed and if you're rigid and you're determined to do it your way or no way, then you'll never be alive to that amazingly random creative idea that just suddenly appears out of nowhere.
What about, you're obviously quite a strong character. You're clearly passionate about what you do. What would you say to someone who's a bit more kind of timid and maybe not as extrovert, but you can I can imagine, like me, you can see that person has got a good idea. What advice would you give to someone who's a bit not very good at expressing themselves?
Well, to give themselves time and to not let stronger personalities or dominant personalities within a company or a room dominate. I'm in a position of privilege now, because as an artistic director, often you will go into a room and people will politely listen, because there is an assumed invisible status which is given to somebody in that role, and I'm very aware of that. So that if I'm in a rehearsal room or I'm talking to you now, yes, I'm going to rabbit on because you want to hear my ideas and you want me to talk, but if you say something, I am going to listen and respond, and that is a good collaborative professional way of working. And if you are a bit more quiet, well, you have a right to be heard. And if you're in a school classroom or a rehearsal room, or you're doing a drama club or whatever it is, and there is somebody who is being dominant and won't shut up, quite frankly, you just have be patient and wait for them to be quiet, and then you say your bit and carry on, and don't let them interrupt you. And if you need to say, hang on a minute, please, can you just let me finish? I'm getting to my point, please just like I've afforded you time to speak, now please allow me to speak. I think that's absolutely fine. But I would hope that in a creative environment, people should be listening to each other. And we know, don't we, we're sensitive as creatives, that if there's somebody who's not saying something, then it is dependent on those of us who either have the perceived power or status to say to that person, are you all right? Do you have anything to add? And I think that's really important as well. I was on jury duty, interestingly, a few weeks back, and both juries I sat on were very sort of lively and confident and comfortable speaking, but there was one person on the first jury I was on who just didn't say anything. And I made a real point of saying, do you have anything to say? Are you all right? And it turns out they were very happy to go with the consensus. They agreed with everything, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's important on us as well as the directors or the leaders or whatever, the teachers, to say, if there is somebody who's a bit more quiet, to give them the platform.
That's you just trying to direct the jury, isn't it? But it's your experience as a director coming to play in jury service. How's the pandemic affected the Curve or the industry as a whole? Because I know you mentioned several other Leeds Playhouse, Birmingham as well. We were speaking to James Brining, who I believe, the other week. So tell us how the pandemic's affected the theatre, how you've adapted, and when you plan to open and what your plans for the future are.
Yeah, so I won't bore you with what a nightmare it's been. I mean, that's sort of standard for everybody, isn't it? It's been a living hell. But like hopefully you've got from our conversation and the stuff of Curve, we're a very sort of can-do, pragmatic, forward-thinking organisation, and we didn't want any challenge that came our way because of the pandemic to sort of be seen as something that we would then do something as second best because of the pandemic. We wanted to embrace all of the challenges and genuinely try and think creatively and rise up. And and we were very, very clear when the pandemic first hit that we had to stay connected with our audiences and our communities. So we had this whole program, which we ran for about a year, of The Show Must Go Online, and archive productions we put online. We did Q&As like this with Curve associate artists, resident creatives. We did Instagram live takeovers. We did town hall meetings with our freelancers, our youth theatre. We kept the youth theatre going online through Zooms. We created content. We commissioned work. We brought the Colour Purple company back together for the Black History Month, which coincided just after the Black Lives Matter movement really gained that brilliant momentum last year, and commissioned them to sort of do a concert for us. So we were determined to stay connected with our audiences and our communities. And then at the back end of last year, when we were meant to open with social distancing, and we'd created this sort of wonderful arena with social distancing, where we were going to do Memoirs of an Asian Football Casual, Sunset Boulevard, and the Colour Purple in concert. When that was all shelved, we thought, well, we can't give up. We're going to film it. So we filmed Sunset Boulevard, we filmed the Colour Purple, and really embraced, camera and film. And rather than just do it as an archive with the camera just looking at it, we made films. We sort of turned our theatre into a film studio and challenged ourselves and found new ways of working, which employed freelancers and employed local artists, local filmmakers to go on that journey with us. And then when the third lockdown hit, we felt like, well, we want everything we've done so far has been meaningful. It has had genuine value. It's not like paying lip service. It's not sort of, it's not schmutter. It's genuine. But what do we do now? I mean, this is just dire. It was so, wasn't it? The sort of back end of last year, it was so grisly and upsetting. And those teachers and, parents at home, you thought, how are they going to cope? So we immediately thought that's where the need is. So we then started a scheme called Curve Classroom, and we sort of knew that the BBC were doing classes online every day, and so we committed at 4:00 every day for 8 weeks. There will be a Curve Classroom where an actor, a director will be using skills that they have as creatives, and they will be teaching a class, whether it's about poetry, about movement, about making, how you draw, and the physics and the maths of drawing a set model. So it was sort of using transferable skills. And now we are planning to reopen. So at the end of May, we're going to be doing a socially distanced season, throwing open the doors of our theatre, giving it back to the community and saying, it's yours, come on in, make work, share your creativity for that first couple of weeks. And then we're also doing a new musical, Amdram. Akasha Deirdre, who's one of the UK's leading South Asian dancer choreographers, he's going to be presenting new works. And then it culminates in a concert of the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber. And then hopefully we do all of that. And then, we're sticking to this government roadmap. We hope they stick to it too. We'll then be opening in June without social distancing and getting, our building back on its feet.
Talking of the government, how do you think the government's treated the live sector, theatre, nighttime economy, hospitality, which all kind of come under the same umbrella? And that part of our economy is massive. It brings in a lot of revenue. But, as someone who works in the live sector, it's frustrating when you see shops open. It's frustrating when you see that restaurants can't let people inside, but people can go shopping. And similarly, theatres and live venues can't open. How do you think the government's treated our sector?
I think they've had to learn very quickly about our sectors. I mean, we always knew they were complicated, the relationship between freelancers, organisations, the gig economy. There's this it's such a back in the day, it was such a fast moving, weird and wonderful, thing that I think is very difficult to grasp. And I think they've had to learn very quickly what it is they're dealing with. And I think, clearly there have been moments at the beginning of the pandemic where it really did feel like we were being forgotten about, we were being left behind. There was a complete lack of understanding. And I think what I struggled with at the beginning was, like, as you've just said, that this is a £1 billion industry. Our cultural industries are celebrated around the world. Our pop music, our fashion, our cuisine, our theatre, these things tour around the world, whether it's virally or physically. And it felt, I remember feeling personally, this is not with my curve hat on, but just feeling personally upset that I was part of an industry that just didn't seem to matter. And they just didn't seem to understand. And I think then, the Cultural Recovery Fund that we have been grateful beneficiaries of, and Curve simply would not be in existence today if it weren't for those government subsidies. The job retention scheme, we've had to go through some very difficult times, restructuring our organisation, sadly making some people redundant, but that job retention scheme has kept us going as well. So from that respect, we are genuinely very grateful to the government, to the Arts Council for that support, because without it we wouldn't be here. But I genuinely think they have gone on those early days were very upsetting. But then I know, I'm not defending the government because they don't need me to defend them. It's not my job. But I know from a position of leadership, sometimes there's a lot going on within your organisation that nobody on the outside would ever have any grasp of or need to know about. And I suppose when an international pandemic hits, there was obviously a lot to take on board. So again, it's not my job to defend them, but nor do I want to bash them just because they have been our lifeline and our saviour, basically.
That's a very good and very diplomatic answer as well, actually. Now you mentioned touring. How important is, because you do put some of your productions on tour, don't you?
Yeah, before we before COVID, we were touring on a regular basis. And I think there was one year, a couple of years ago, where we sold more tickets on tour for a Made at Curve show than the National Theatre. So touring is a massive part of our business, if you like. Wizard of Oz, when we finally get it on, that will be touring. Sister Act was about to go on tour. Hairspray will be going on tour in the autumn. Grease will be going on tour again in the autumn. So, these tours, taking our work and our identity and our ethos on the road is really important to us. And I feel like Curve, when we get going again, when the sector gets going again, not only can we help rebuild the cultural quarter and, you know, the gig and nighttime economy in Leicester city centre, but hopefully our work on the road will also help other regional theatres and other towns and cities sort of, you know, get back on their feet, and we can play an active and genuine sort of part in that, really.
Well, on that topic, I've got a question from one of our students, and I want him to ask you himself, because he can tell you a little bit more about a venue that he wants to mention. So Kenneth, can you switch your mic on and your camera if you want, but certainly your mic so we can hear you. So Kenneth, I'll ask Nikolai your question.
Yeah, so basically we have this place here in Wrexham called Tea Pub, which is a very community-driven place, which has like shops, it has a food court, but it's also got a space that can be used as a theatre for, or even just a general place to hold workshops. And I was just thinking, would you ever be interested in possibly coming to Wrexham and, you know, maybe putting on some projects or even just devising a theatre piece?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kenneth. And it sounds like an amazing resource you've got up there. I mean, one of the things we are really keen to do as part of really connecting with our communities and getting out in to maybe school settings and community settings where people, you know, don't necessarily come into the city centre or come into our theatre, for example, is to create like a schools touring company or a really sort of smaller scale company that literally, you know, it's a van and a couple of actors, and we're going out into these less sort of grand, you know, sort of big traditional theatrical settings. And, you know, there's no reason not to think that one day, if we can get that off the ground, that we wouldn't come up to Wrexham and, you know, work with you guys and see what you guys are doing up there. So that's very much an aspiration and a dream at the moment. But yes, it's definitely something that we'd be open to. I mean, you know, we're a very sort of can-do sort of organisation in that sense.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, check it out. Tea Pub's a very, very great place, actually, I have to say. Quick question from Deborah, who's it's a good question. She says, would you say adapting to sudden change in your job is a must, and finding the light in a dark situation too? She says it sounds like you're very good at those things.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just a rehearsal room or working in the building like Curve on a regular day is all about problem solving and finding creative ways to do, you know, a lot with little budget or, you know, whatever it is. So you're always thinking imaginatively. And I think one of the things I was really proud of our team at Curve last year, sort of getting to Christmas, you know, just gone, was that we made it through the year. We were resilient. There were so many times where we thought, that's it, it's over, we're going to have to give up because, you know, that's it sort of thing. And we didn't. We kept finding ways through. We kept sort of hustling and being resilient and coming up with imaginative solutions. And I really felt like if we could get through that year of COVID, we can get through anything as a team. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us in all industries, whether it's arts, whatever, thinking creatively, collaboratively with a team, problem solving. It's so important.
You said hustle there. I think that the hustle is a major part of any creative sector, just pushing what you do and approaching people. We've got a few quick fire questions before we wrap up. Is there what's your dream production, or have you done your dream production? What would you most like to put on or be involved with?
Well, before West Side Story, I would have probably said West Side Story, and then I think a dream production would be, you know, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, to create at Curve in Leicester something like the next Hamilton, the next Les Mis, the next Matilda, the next Rent, one of these shows that really does change the course of, you know, theatre history. We'd love to, you know, do that. And then watch this space. You know, there are shows coming up over the next year that have been on the sort of bucket list for years, and we're really privileged and thrilled to be working on them.
Okay, another question from Sophia, who's actually had to leave, but she said, you've had an incredible career. In fact, you have an incredible career as a director. Do you ever watch the actors you work with and think that could be me on that stage? Do you ever wish you'd made it as an actor?
No, never. I never ever have felt that. I just marvel at great actors, and I love their courage and their resilience, because, you know, going to endless auditions and all of that, it's not something I can do. It's not something I'm interested in. I respect it as an art form. I love actors. I love working with them in the relationship I have as a director. And no, it's weird. I mean, like, there's some shows where, like, an actor's fallen ill, and, you know, you've had to go on with the book, and it's exciting, and, you know, but it's just not my thing. I'm just don't enjoy it in the same way I do as this part of the job.
And are you still do you still have connections with Fassbender, Hardy, and Wright, and any other people?
No, I wish I'd sort of kept in contact with Tom a bit more. We met at a drama centre sort of reunion event a few years ago, and it was nice to have a chat. And, you know, his career's going so well, and I always remember there was we used to do these things called object exercises, which were you know, part of the method training, where your character would be in a space alone, and you would see them, you know, interacting with objects like cooking dinner or whatever it was. And we were working on a play called The Matchmaker by Thornton Wilder, and Tom and I were doing a scene together, but Tom was also playing a different role of the cab driver. And his object exercise was the cab driver had, you know, been given a good tip so he could go out and buy a full, you know, cooked chicken, and he came home into his little flat and devoured this chicken. And it was some of the best acting I've ever seen. I'll remember it forever. Tom was so vulnerable, and you just got this study of this man who was living in poverty, who was enjoying this feast, and it was just such a great piece of acting. I'll never forget it. It was so beautiful.
But I mean, as a director, do you take things from actors? I mean, obviously you direct actors, but do you ever get stuff the other way from the actor that you might take on board?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, like, it's all about collaboration. So the actor is my way of working in the rehearsal room is completely like, you know, we're equals. We're coming with ideas and sharing ideas, and, you know, challenging each other. And, you know, my job is to, you know, elevate their performance and give ideas which will hopefully make them better, and their ideas and their understanding of the production, you know, and the ideas they bring to the table, elevate it. I mean, when we were filming Sunset Boulevard, we were sort of doing this thing where the whole theatre was like a sort of, you know, a sound stage in Hollywood. So the Fly Tower was, you know, like a metaphor for a little flat, and, you know, the stalls were suddenly like a swimming pool, and, you know, it was all that sort of thing. And Danny Mack, who was playing Joe Gillis, who is the sort of narrator in the piece, you know, he said, well, why don't we start this scene under the studio seating, which was all sort of scaffolding, and that can be like a metaphor for the office. And then when they walk out onto the studio lot, you can film us coming round, and then you get the whole expanse of the theatre in the background. And it was so inspired. It was such a good idea, because he understood the production he was in, and he was able to develop an idea better than I would ever have, because of his understanding of it as an actor being in that production. And that, for me, is an ultimate sort of example of that sort of collaboration, really.
Okay. I normally ask people if they have any regrets, but I'm guessing that you probably don't.
Oh, I have lots of regrets.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
I
wasn't very confident starting out. I was always told I'd never be a director, and, you know, those people who, you know, tell you no and you can't do stuff, and I believed them for many years.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I looking back, I just wish I'd have been a bit more confident, and,
well, there you go,
not let those demons.
Well, that kind of leads up to my final question, which I ask all of our guests. If you could go back to the young Nikolai, what would you tell him?
I would tell him it's going to be all right. Trust your instincts. Trust all the things that are unique and original to you. And don't let the voices, both internally and externally, influence you or create those sort of imposter syndrome demons, which, you know, I still live with to this day. But, you know, like I'm talking to you now and I'm going, oh my God, you're just talking rubbish. But, you know,
No, you're not.
I've been asked to come here, and this is a moment to hopefully share some of my experience. So I'm going to be confident in that and proud of what I've got to say. And if people don't like it, if they disagree, that's fine. But it's, you know, it's coming from a place of hopefully, well, it's coming from a place of love and wanting to sort of help. So, you know, I just wish I'd been a bit more confident and not listened to all of those horrible sort of demons that we all have.
Well, I think you've more than made up for that. And so Nikolai Foster, Artistic Director of the Curve Theatre in Leicester, thank you very much for joining us and good luck for the future.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to talk to you, Graeme, and thanks for having me. It's been such a thrill. Thank you.